Many Christians today connect modern Israel directly to biblical prophecy. Others believe the promises are fulfilled spiritually in Christ. Faithful believers disagree. Instead of letting headlines, politics, or emotion shape our theology, we have to ask, how does the New Testament interpret the Old Testament? And what is the relationship between Israel and the church? Our allegiance isn't to a nation or a political movement. It is to Jesus Christ. This video seeks to provide an overview of the historical and theological ideas surrounding Judaism and Zionism. This is not an attempt to advocate or settle the debate, but to better understand it. Let's dive in. In 1897, a group of Jews met in a theater in Switzerland. They declared that the Jewish people needed their own country. The place they chose? It wasn't New York. It wasn't Argentina. It was a dusty, Ottoman-controlled region called Palestine. The world laughed at them. 50 years later, the state of Israel existed. How did that happen? And more importantly, how did a 2,000-year-old religious prayer turn into one of the most powerful and controversial military states on earth? To understand that, we first have to understand the religion that kept that prayer alive: Judaism. What is it? What do Jews believe? And how did those beliefs create a connection to this specific strip of land that no other place could replace? To answer that, we have to go way back to Abraham, back to a covenant, back to a verse in Genesis that says, "To your descendants I have given this land." But here's the catch. Other people were already living there, and other Jews reading the same Bible believe that creating a state before the Messiah arrives is a direct rebellion against God. Part 1. What is Judaism, the foundation? Before we can talk about Zionism, we have to answer a basic question. What is Judaism? Judaism is one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. It began with a man named Abraham, who, according to the Hebrew Bible, made a covenant with God. The core belief? There is one God, and the Jewish people have a special responsibility to follow His laws. These laws are laid out in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and expanded upon in the Talmud, a massive collection of rabbinic debates and teachings. Where Christians believe in the Trinity, that God is one being existing in 3 persons: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Judaism rejects this completely. From a Jewish perspective, God is a perfect unity. He cannot be divided into persons or parts. He is simply one. This belief is summed up in a short prayer called the Shema, found in Deuteronomy 6:4. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." But Judaism isn't just about beliefs. It's about practice. For thousands of years, Jewish life has been centered on study, reading, and interpreting sacred texts. Prayer, praying 3 times a day, facing Jerusalem. And mitzvot, the 613 commandments governing everything from what you eat, keeping kosher, to how you treat the poor. And woven into all of this, the prayers, the holidays, the songs, is a constant theme: the memory of a homeland. Let's look at the key verses that created this connection. The story begins in Genesis 12:1, where God tells Abraham, "Go forth to the land that I will show you." And in Genesis 15:18, that land is defined: "To your descendants I have given this land." This concept of a promised land is central. But the Bible also tells the story of exile. The kingdoms are conquered. The temples in Jerusalem are destroyed. The emotion of that exile is captured in Psalm 137:1. "By the rivers of Babylon there we sat, and wept, as we thought of Zion." Here, Zion becomes a symbol of a lost homeland. For millennia, this wasn't a political program. It was a religious hope embedded in daily Jewish life. Jews prayed 3 times a day for the ingathering of the exiles. At the end of the Passover Seder, and on the holiest day of Yom Kippur, they would declare, "Next year in Jerusalem." For almost 2,000 years, that's what it was: a prayer, a dream. Judaism kept the memory of Zion alive. But in the 19th century, that dream began to change form. Let me know in the comment below if you'll like a deep dive on the major branches of Judaism and what they believe. Part 2. The birth of political Zionism. So, what turns a 2,000-year-old religious prayer into a modern political movement? The short answer is persecution. For centuries, Jews in Europe lived as a precarious minority. They were expelled from countries and subjected to violent attacks called pogroms. The hope for acceptance soured in the late 1800s with the rise of a new racial anti-Semitism. This environment created Theodor Herzl. Herzl was a secular Jewish journalist in Vienna. He was fully assimilated into European culture. But in 1894, he covered the trial of Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish French officer falsely convicted of treason. Herzl witnessed crowds chanting, "Death to the Jews," in France, the country of liberty. He had a revelation. Assimilation hadn't worked. If anti-Semitism could erupt in France, it could happen anywhere. His solution was radical. The Jewish people needed not just religious freedom but political sovereignty. They needed their own state. In 1896, he published Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state. A year later, in 1897, he convened the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. Their platform stated, "Zionism aims at establishing a legally secured home for the Jewish people in Palestine." Now, why Palestine? In 1897, the region was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. But for the Zionists, this was Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, the land their religion had told them to pray toward for 2 millennia. This mattered immediately. In 1903, Britain offered Herzl a different territory in East Africa, the Uganda Scheme. It caused a huge fight. The movement ultimately rejected it. For them, it had to be the land of Israel, or nowhere. Herzl wrote in his diary, "At Basel I founded the Jewish state. In 50 years, everyone will see it." He was off by 1 year. The State of Israel was declared in 1948. This was a seismic shift. Jews were now organizing as a nation to take history into their own hands. But this new secular nationalism immediately ran headfirst into the 2,000-year-old religion that had kept the dream alive in the first place. Part 3. The Great Religious Debate. When Herzl started his movement, he was mostly secular. But what did the rabbis think? How did Judaism respond to this new idea of political Zionism? It was a massive debate. And we can see it in how different groups use the very same Bible and Talmud. First, the religious Zionist argument. At first, most Orthodox rabbis were opposed, but a few saw it differently. In 1902, Rabbi Isaac Jacob Reintz founded the Mizrahi movement, the religious Zionist faction. He saw Zionism as a practical way to relieve Jewish suffering, a fulfillment of the Jewish value of preserving life. For religious Zionists, the establishment of Israel was seen through a theological lens. Reshit tzmichat geulatenu, the first flowering of our redemption. It suggests the state signals the dawn of the Messianic age, a core Jewish hope. This idea supercharged after 1967. In the Six-Day War, Israel captured East Jerusalem and the biblical territories of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. For the first time in 2,000 years, Jews had access to the Western Wall, the holiest site in Judaism where they could pray. Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook declared, "This land is ours, the eternal land of our forefathers." This led to the rise of Gush Emunim, a movement that pushed for Jewish settlement in the territories. For them, this wasn't just politics. It was a sacred commandment, a mitzvah, to hasten redemption. Second, the anti-Zionist argument. But for a significant minority of Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jews, Zionism is a sin against Judaism. The classic argument comes from Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum, the Satmar Rebbe, in his book Vayoel Moshe, 1961. His core argument rests on the 3 oaths from the Talmud, Ketubot 111a. The Talmud teaches that God imposed 3 oaths at the time of exile. 1. Not to ascend to the land like a wall, meaning not to return en masse and by force. 2. Not to rebel against the nations. 3. An oath binding the nations not to persecute the Jews excessively. Rabbi Teitelbaum argues Zionism violates these oaths. Creating a state by force before the Messiah arrives is rebelling against God's will. True redemption, he argues, can only come from God, not human political action. For him, pious Jews should remain in exile, studying Torah and praying, until God decides to bring them home. So, two sides, both deeply rooted in Judaism, same texts, opposite conclusions. One sees Israel as the first flowering of redemption, the other as a desecration of God's name. Part 4. Secular and Critical Views. While the religious debates happened in yeshivas, the secular Zionists were actually building a state. For them, the Bible wasn't just a divine contract, it was a national charter, a deed to the land. The socialist pioneers who built the first kibbutzim weren't observant. They didn't keep kosher or pray 3 times a day, but they were deeply connected to the land's history. They named their towns, like Tel Aviv, after biblical places. They revived Hebrew, the language of the Torah, as a daily spoken language. Chaim Weizmann, Israel's first president, said in 1919, "The claim of the Jewish people to Palestine is based on the historic title, rooted in the Bible. For them, they were indigenous people returning home. But this claim collided with the people already living there, the Arabs of Palestine. The Zionist narrative of a land without a people ignored the reality of a vibrant Arab population. Critics, like historian Nur Masalha, argue the Zionist use of the Bible was a form of invented traditions, a divine mandate used to dispossess the Palestinians. The Palestinian Nakba, catastrophe, of 1948 is the other side of that coin. And there's a third, progressive Jewish voice. Rabbi Lawrence Englander points out that later prophets like Jeremiah 11:5 make the promise conditional. The land is a gift, but it comes with obligations of justice. For progressive Jews, a Jewish state must be a just state, a light unto the nations, as the prophet Isaiah described the Jewish mission. So we have the Bible as a deed, the Bible as a tool of colonization, and the Bible as a moral contract. Conclusion: a living debate. So where does that leave us? Judaism is a 3,000-year-old religion built on covenant, law, and memory. Zionism is a modern political movement that grew out of that history, especially during times of persecution. And we've seen how that movement created a lasting rupture within Judaism itself. Religious Zionists see the state as the footsteps of the Messiah, a divine gift. Ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists see it as a rebellion against God's will, a violation of sacred oaths. And in between, a wide spectrum of secular, cultural, and progressive Jews debate what a Jewish state should actually look like. The conversation about Judaism and Zionism is not simple. It's a debate between memory and hope, between text and power. It's a debate that happens in synagogues, in Knesset chambers, and around family dinner tables. To understand it is to understand not just a conflict, but the very essence of a people's struggle to define themselves in the modern world. Thanks for studying with me. Let me know in the comment below, where do you land in this topic? Please like and subscribe for more Bible topics explained visually.